Alright, today we're going to do something a little bit different. As opposed to actually cooking a meal, I'm going to show you how to process a heart. Like I mentioned in one of my videos back, if you've never done it before and it's not processed already, it can be a little bit intimidating. So we're going to take a crack at making that step easier for everybody else. So here I have a venison heart. You can see we've got sort of two main pieces here, the left and right ventricle. And those are going to be, we're going to separate it into those pieces there. The first thing we're going to do is run it under cold water and make sure to wash out all of the areas where these arteries and veins come in. And just make sure you're going to get some blood clots and stuff, pull those all out, and then pat it dry a little bit. After that, we're going to start working on getting all of this fat off. It's technically edible, but it's really not good. So with some of the fat, you can actually start to peel it off, and you'll see where it comes off and where it ends and the meat begins. But the process is made easier, obviously, if you just take a knife to it and start cutting away. So we want to be careful to not cut away too much of our meat. But again, this fat is really not good. So if you're worried about taking a little bit too much, it's better to take more and get rid of the fat than it is to leave it on and ruin your meat. So as we start getting the fat off, we're also gonna start cutting away at these little flaps on top that are holding the arteries in. There is a little bit of meat on some of these flaps here, but especially with such a small heart, it's really not worth saving. So then you'll see as you start to peel back the fat, you'll get a pretty defined place to start cutting that away. We're going to disconnect it from the inside. And then we should be left with this core here. And we're just going to trim that off. So now we're left with a piece here. And it's starting to look a lot more like a cut of meat. If you look inside, you can start to see that we have some of this fibrous tissue that's going to get cleaned out. But now if we look at it, we've got one big chamber here that's separated a little bit by this wall. So we're going to slowly trim down that line. You can kind of feel and guide with your thumb. And just start following down. And then you're going to see that it kind of folds over into the front. So we're going to take and separate that piece. We're going to go through and trim all of this fibrous tissue off. And then we're going to flip it over and make sure that we get any of the remaining fat that needs to come. So here we have our first piece. Now it's starting to look like a little steak. Again, this is really good fajita meat. There's plenty of other ways to cook it, but the fajita tends to be my favorite variation. Now we're left with one big chamber. There's some connective tissue that runs here. If you just cut that, it'll open to one big chamber. And what we're gonna do is just cut it down the middle. And sort of butterfly it open. And then if it makes it easier, this can get turned into 2 smaller pieces as well. So if we just cut it right down the center, and then we're gonna do the same, we're gonna trim this fibrous tissue out here. And then flip it over and again, get rid of any of the extra fat that we might have. So here we've got our second steak-like cut. And then again, we're just going to do the same on the third. Any harder material that we may still have from the arteries is going to get trimmed out. And again, get rid of the little fibers. And now we have our 3 pieces. Again, it's a lot like steak. As I've said before, one of my favorite ways of cooking it is making fajitas. You can see it's got the perfect thickness, so if you slice it up real thin and get it in a good marinade, it's wonderful that way. If you want to cook it more like a steak, you want to be careful. It's going to cook very quickly. Maybe 2 or 3 minutes on each side would be pushing it. So it's not something you want to throw in a hot pan and cook the hell out of it, or it's just not gonna have the good flavor that it would otherwise. And so there you have it. Again, it's intimidating if you've never done it before. I've done it a couple times before and it's still a little bit intimidating, but it's really not that difficult. Just get into it and get going, and the anatomy of the heart will kind of guide you into how you should be cutting it up.